Hi, I'm Bruce Hyer. I'm the director of Wabakimi Fishing and Canoeing Outfitters up in Armstrong, Ontario. I'm also the creator of Wabakimi Wilderness Park. Many years ago in 1978, I drew a line on a map and we started a fight about it, and nobody wanted it except me and a few friends and a few wilderness lovers. Loggers and miners and government didn't want it, but it's there. It was a 25-year battle, lost lots of battles, but we won the war. So now Wabakimi is 5 million acres, twice as big as Yellowstone, twice as big as the state of Connecticut, twice as big as Prince Edward Island, 5 million acres, that's 2.5 million hectares, and it's quite a beautiful place. So we love it. And we have a couple of products. One is a map, a planning map for Wabakimi Park, so people can chat with me over the phone with a map in front of them and talk about routes. And we have a brochure that we can snail mail to you or go to wabakimi.com. Call me anytime or email me anytime. My email address is simple. It's bruce@wabakimi.com. So we're about to see a slideshow about Wabakimi, and afterward, if you have questions, we'll do our best to answer them or email me anytime. So let's watch the slideshow. Boreal Forest in Canada, Wabakimi Wilderness Park. Here's a picture of me and my lovely spouse and partner. I'm Bruce at wabakimi.com. Just email me anytime, bruce@wabakimi.com. Some of the pictures here are by Ian Beatty, one of our beaver floatplane pilots and one of the most wonderful photographers in the world. Wabakimi Wilderness Park is about a 3-hour drive north of Thunder Bay. It's about 6 hours north of Duluth, Minnesota. It's only an hour or an hour and a half further away than Quetico. It's closer than Caribou, and yet it's kind of back in the 14th or 15th century instead of the 21st century. When I was a little kid growing up in Connecticut, people ask little kids, what will you be when you grow up? And when I was 5, I used to say, I'm moving to Canada and live in a log cabin in the woods and live off the land and be a bush pilot, a trapper, a paddler, a wilderness guide. And they said, oh, that's so sweet. But that's what I did. So when I was 30, I left the States and moved to Shawanibus Lake, which is now right on the edge of Wabakimi Wilderness Park. We have a main base lodge, the Wabakimi Wilderness Lodge. It has 8 bedrooms and a big common room and a great cook and great staff and beautiful place overlooking the lake. And some people go there for just a holiday, but mostly it's people who are going to fly into an outpost from our floatplane base right there, or go on a canoe trip from anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks. This is what it looks like inside. Not a bad campsite inside the lodge. Now, how do you access Wabakimi? It's tricky. There are not many access points. There are only a couple of mediocre bush roads. This is a good one. Some of them are really bad. But they go to outside the park. There are no roads into the park. You can go to about a half a day or a day away from the park and paddle across Crown Land. So that's one way to get into Wabakimi. Another way is to take via rail. Join German tourists and Ojibwe Aboriginal people and maybe another fellow canoeist. Load your stuff onto the train and it goes across the southern boundary of the park. And then now, over half of the people that go to Wabakimi, over half of our clients, fly at least one way into the park, maybe fly a week's worth of paddling into the heart of the park and then paddle back to a road pickup. The northern boundary of Wabakimi is the Albany River, big falls, big rapids, quite a trip, one of the nicest trips in Ontario. Wabakimi is about 110 miles tall and about 80 miles wide. Now, you have to watch a few airplane pictures for several reasons. If you hate float planes, don't come to Wabakimi. You'll probably see one. You might even ride in one. Now, I love paddling more than anything in the world other than my family. But my second love is flying float planes. They can get you into the heart of the park quickly. You go in half an hour from the 21st century and noise and pollution to the 17th century and paddling, and you feel like a voyageur. We use two kinds of float planes. This is a Beaver, and it will carry one external canoe and 2 or 3 people inside and your gear. And they are old, beautiful float planes that are safe and effective. Now this is an Otter float plane with a turbo engine conversion. It will carry 2 canoes and as many people as you want to put into it. 5 or 6 people in 2 canoes is no problem. Now, Wabakimi is about half water. That's a rough guess. I haven't figured that out scientifically. But there are some parts of Wabakimi that seem like they're more water than air. You better have your navigation skills down good, because once you're confused in one of these interconnected waterways and don't know where you are, it might take you a while to figure out where you need to go. As I said, one way to get into Wabakimi, either to a couple of our outposts or in for a canoe trip or out from a canoe trip, is by the bush train. It runs 3 times a week at odd hours, sometimes a bit late. It's fun. And once again, you get on the train. I call the train a time machine. You get on in the 21st century, hop off in the 17th century. You need to know the mileage of the spot you're going to. This is our outpost at Allen Water Bridge from the air. So we're looking north, and there is nothing between here and Russia except for a few remote indigenous villages and the North Pole with its melting ice cap. We used to run lots of winter trips until I became a winter wimp and had to go to sports shows a lot. So we still do the occasional one, but most of our trips are summertime trips, either fishing in outposts or canoeing. I lived in what's now Wabakimi for 2 years in the mid-70s, lived 95% off the land. If this picture looks like it's about 49 below, it is. I built a little cabin, lived in it all by myself for a couple of years off the land. Had a little float plane, occasionally used it to blast in and out, but not very often. And at that time I ran some winter survival trips, either building snow caves, snow trenches, or using a prospector tent like this with a little wood stove. Let's talk about fishing in Wabakimi. This is a walleye. And we have 7 fly-in and 1 train-in outpost where you can go to one of these, have a nice little cabin, fantastic fishing, an outboard that runs. And now, if you're a canoeist, Wabakimi has hundreds of lakes, literally. But on about 20 of the big ones, maybe a little less, there is a flying outpost. So on some of the big lakes, you may see a fisherman fishing in a motorboat. If you don't want to see, briefly, a fisherman in a motorboat, I know how to route you well away from those big lakes with an outpost. Our fishing people that do go to an outpost, we fly in an otter or a beaver. And this is one of those outposts. This is the cabin I used to live in, and now it's one of our nice outposts on Shawanibus Lake. Some of the lakes in Wabakimi and some of our outposts have not only walleye and pike, but they also have lake trout like this that are lean and delicious and look more like speckled trout than lake trout. This is my Great Pyrenees buddy named Wabakimi, or Kimi for short, at the Shawanibus outpost. As I mentioned before, some of our canoe trips and some of our outposts are accessible by train. It's kind of a fun way. One of them is Allen Water Bridge. Great starting point or ending point for a canoe trip, and a beautiful outpost. Here's the outpost, right on the edge of a lake with tons of fish. This is kind of a medium-sized park. They get lots bigger than this one. Now let's talk about paddling in Wabakimi. Once again, look at the amount of water. You can go from anywhere in Wabakimi to anywhere else in Wabakimi if you're willing to paddle and do a bit of portaging. Most of the portages in Wabakimi are far shorter than Algonquin or Quetico, typically 50, 100, 200 meters or 200 yards. The odd one might be a half a mile, but there's only about 3 in the entire park that are half a mile. Most of them are far shorter. Wabakimi has a varied landscape. Some of it is cliffy and rocky. Some of it, it's rocky underneath, but it's bowl-like, and so you have either very dry sites or you have sites with marshes and fens and wetlands and rivers and lakes. The northern boundary is the Albany River. This is Snake Falls up on the Albany. Now, Wabakimi was created and is recreated from time to time by fire and ice. As recently as 7,000 years ago, the glaciers retreated from Minnesota and then Thunder Bay and then Wabakimi, and the big boulders that they had trapped in them dropped them straight down onto the landscape. They're called glacial erratics, and there's lots of them there. There also were places where there are, what are they called? Bruce, test your memory here. Glacial spillways. This is a glacial spillway where ice 2 miles thick on the landscape melted, ran off in huge torrents, and gouged out ancient waterways. Some of them still have water in them, and some of them are dry. The northern limits of Wabakimi up near the Albany River have deep soils and poplars and birch and really big trees, and is a more fertile environment. But most of Wabakimi is bedrock and shallow soils, and nutrients are scarce. Now, Smokey the Bear lied to us when he said fire destroys forests. Up in the Boreal forest, the forest is actually programmed to burn and recycle nutrients, and the ashes from that fire are alkaline. They provide a good seed bed. The trees drop their seeds, and the next forest starts to grow immediately. One of the first things to grow is fireweed, and you know what these are. I don't have to explain them. Tons of blueberries come up on these burns. This is the Palisade River up at the northern limits of the park, one of the most beautiful parts of the park, most remote. Unless you have several weeks to go, most people fly into the headwaters of the Palisade River and paddle back out. Some campsites have been used by us and some Aboriginal people for quite a while. They're not overused, but you can see a few are used. But a lot of the landscape is very untouched. You can camp anywhere you like. Last year, there were only a few hundred people in Wabakimi, but in a very busy year, a maximum of about 700 people all season come to Wabakimi, some of them Americans, some Europeans, and some Canadians. This is the Fantasia Portage on the Lookout River. It's a caribou trail, a wolf trail on the top of an esker running north and south, and we also get to use it as a portage. You can see the feather mosses underneath the spruce trees here. Very little soil, and right here there's almost no soil, but the feather mosses, these green mosses, make a kind of a pseudo soil, and the mat of roots and those mosses create a forest bed that supports a forest of spruce and pine trees, which it's hard to imagine how they do it. There are 7 Aboriginal communities, indigenous communities, around the edges of Wabakimi Park. The Ojibwe people have lived here for thousands of years, and they're still around on the edges. Many of them used to trap and hunt and fish inside Wabakimi, not so much anymore, occasionally. Some of them were trappers. This is a trap line inside of Wabakimi, and we can still see the vestiges of some of the teepee frames and old trapping cabins from the days when indigenous people were in the bush more than they are today. My friend Charlie Mesnikisek hung this moose skull in a tree. He believed that he wasn't a great hunter. He believed he had the right attitude, and the moose allowed him to shoot it and support his family. And so he would make a tobacco offering and say a little prayer to Manitou and the spirit of the moose, thanking him for allowing them to harvest that moose and put the moose in a place in the tree where the moose could see the view, and he could come back later and shoot that moose when it was reincarnated. There are lots of pictographs in Wabakimi Park. If we really like you and trust you, we might even tell you where they are, because we would hate to see any of them damaged or even touched. Let's talk about whitewater in Wabakimi. This is the Albany River, and you can see it's a big river with big standing waves. If you're in the right spot, this particular rapid is runnable, and if you're in the wrong spot, you could be in deep trouble in a very remote location. And then there are some whitewater rivers closer to the bottom of the park that are runnable if you have the skills and the right kind of boat. This is the Allen Water River. The first 25 kilometers of the river have 25 runnable rapids, anywhere from class 1 to almost class 3. There are portages around all the rapids. I made most of them decades ago, and the portages are there if you have a Kevlar boat or you don't have the skills or you're just not in the mood to run rapids today. There are dozens of flatwater trips in Wabakimi, and there are 3 or 4 good whitewater rivers as well if you want to do that. There are spectacular waterfalls throughout Wabakimi. This is one particular one on the Kapka River, where there are 4 50-foot waterfalls in a very short distance, with spectacular campsites, great fishing, and lots of blueberries at the middle to end of August. This is the Ogoki River, which runs north and runs into the Albany. But as I said, there's portages between all the water bodies. You can go from wherever you want to wherever you want if you have the time, the inclination, and are willing to do a little bit of portaging. On Lower Wabakimi Lake, you can join the annual Lower Wabakimi Sailing Regatta. If you're careful and wear your life jacket and have the skills, you can use a 6x8 tarp to do a 12-mile lake in about an hour. It's pretty exciting. As I mentioned before, you can camp anywhere in Wabakimi. You may have to negotiate with the trees, but camp where you like. There are no reserved campgrounds, and there's so few people in Wabakimi, you're far more likely in a one-week trip to see a caribou than see another paddler. At the end of one of those hot portages, which may be a little buggy in June, there are wonderful swimming spots and beaches in the bottom of rapids and falls. Fishing is unbelievable in Wabakimi, and eating the fish in Wabakimi is also terrific. This is a 5-pound speckled trout from a tributary of the Albany River that very nicely fed a group of 9 canoeists on one of our guided canoe trips. We run some guided trips, or you can do guide yourself, do it yourself trip if you like, no problem. We love to teach skills, but if you already have the skills and the experience, we can match you up with the right kind of route. Probably of all our services, the most important one we offer is great trip notes, great maps, and great advice on where to go and how to go there. On our guided trips, we tend to carry real food. The packs are a little heavier, but we use some freeze-drieds, but we also bring some real food with us, fresh food. This is Robert Bateman, the famous wildlife artist, and Alida Karstad, also a very famous wildlife artist. And the reason for this slide is we run some guided trips that have a theme. The theme might be geology or boreal ecology or art or photography. So ask us about those if you're interested. This photograph is taken in June at 11 o'clock at night, and as you can see, it's not dark yet. So might want to bring eye shades for a trip in June because the days are very long. June is my favorite time to go paddling. Now, if it's going to be buggy, June is likely to be it. When the bugs are done in Wabakimi, they're done. So the last 2 weeks of May are pre-bugs. June, depends on the year, may or may not be a bit buggy with black flies and mosquitoes. But July, August, and September are paradise with virtually no bugs at all. When they're done, they're done. But the reason I like June is it's breeding and feeding season. Lots of wildlife, lots of flowers. Fishing is amazing, and bugs don't really bother me. But if you're sensitive to bugs or have somebody in your party who is, you probably don't want to come in June. Or if you do, bring lots of repellent and bug jackets. This is a beautiful little orchid called Hooker's Orchis, very rare and quite spectacular. This little tiny thing is the smallest of all the ferns. It's called a grape fern. It's about an inch high. You probably know what this is. It's called the moccasin flower, and it's spectacularly beautiful, and it's out in June. There are 3 different kinds of water lilies in Wabakimi, and one of them, Nymphea, is the dwarf water lily. It's quite rare, but found in Wabakimi. This looks and tastes like cranberries, and a lot of people call it highbush cranberry, but it's really a viburnum, which is in the maple family, so I call these cranberry viburnum. A little sugar and boil them up and put them onto your bannock. Pretty delicious. Now this picture was taken way up north near Hudson Bay. We run the odd trip onto rivers like the Winnisk. Big, wide, Arctic, and very, very different ecosystem. There are moose in Wabakimi, a fair number, but it's more caribou habitat than it is moose habitat. Moose really like clear cuts and fresh burns, whereas caribou like the mature kinds of forests that are found in Wabakimi. This moose here was not happy when I took her picture from about a foot away with a very wide-angle lens, and right after I snapped the shutter, she did her best to try to kill me. She did not succeed. Thank you, moose. Now, moose females first have calves when they're only 1.5 years old, and they often have 2 and sometimes even 3. Caribou, on the other hand, don't breed till they're 2.5, and they never have more than 1 calf, so they have much lower reproductive rate, and they don't bounce back as quickly from adverse effects, whether they're habitat, overhunting, logging, roads, disturbance. One of the main reasons for my being motivated to create Wabakimi was it has somewhere between 300 and 500 woodland caribou, rare threatened species, that are quite safe and doing well in Wabakimi. This is a typical caribou calving lake with lots of islands and points, where in late May and early June they drop their calves on the islands and points to avoid predators. Here's Mom with a teenager in the fall. This is a bull on the shoreline of Wabakimi Lake. Here's a bull in the fall, polished antlers, red in his eye, swollen neck. He's looking for fighting and amour. And the caribou are pretty mild most of the year, but the males in the fall get a little bit difficult. Here's his girlfriend. You can see why he's interested. They sure are pretty. And here is the boudoir in the fall in the Staghorn Swamp, the mating season for the caribou in the fall. Wabakimi is particularly good winter habitat for caribou. It has lots of scattered forest on bare bedrock and shallow soils or gravel, and there's lots of blueberries, but there's also lichens. In the wintertime, caribou eat almost exclusively lichens. One of my master's degrees is in caribou, so I'm Mr. Wabakimi, but I'm also kind of Mr. Caribou. I did an area survey for 3 winters where I collared 14 caribou and followed them around for 3 years, and did some photographing and mapping of them from the air. In March and early April, their version of going to Florida is to go out onto the sunny, warm lakes and drink the melting water on top of the ice and sunbathe. This is a Canada lynx, beautiful picture by Ian Beatty. Here's another picture of a lynx, a little less beautiful photo, but still a beautiful animal taken by me. When I collared my caribou, the wolves used a snowmobile trail to access and kill one caribou with a collar on it. So I went to retrieve the collar, sat by the caribou for a couple of days at minus 40, and snapped this picture of the wolf coming back to feed. That is one of my staff's footprint. He has 13 Triple E boots, and that's a 13 Triple E wolf print, probably 150-pound big male. You probably know what some of these little critters are, but it's fun to take their picture and see them in Wabakimi. This is a great gray owl. They nest in Wabakimi. This particular owl I've been watching breed in the same spot, no, I won't tell you where it is, for 40 years. Now, it may be its descendants, it may not be the same owl, but it's the same breeding spot. Similarly, there's a spot where a goshawk, eastern goshawk, a very large and aggressive hawk, breeds, and I go back periodically to check on them, and periodically they attack me and try to gouge my eyes out. You know what this is, the U.S. national symbol. We have lots of them there. I'm very proud of the fact that when I lived in the States, I was the man that first banned DDT in the USA when I was in charge of pesticide registration for the state of Connecticut. In the U.S. in the late 60s, there were only 96 breeding pairs of eagles in the entire continental U.S., and now they've come back. And when I first went to Wabakimi in 1976, there were hardly any eagles. Now there's tons of them. Now, there are not polar bears in Wabakimi, but we do run the odd trip on the Winnis, the Fawn, the Severn, the Otosquin, and we sometimes see polar bears there. This is taken with a wide-angle lens from quite close. Back to Wabakimi. The visual imagery in Wabakimi and the opportunities for photography are really quite spectacular. So there are hundreds of lakes in Wabakimi, maybe 100 people at a time in all of Wabakimi, 5 million acres. So the chances of you being able to appreciate a lake like this all by yourself and not see another human being are quite good. The mighty Albany, one of the big falls on the Albany River. This is a picture taken with forest fire upwind, and hence the orange glow on the sky and on the water. This is the heart of the park, Wabakimi Lake. The Palisade River, quite wild, quite remote, quite spectacular, nice cliffs. The Ogoki River, Collins River. This is one of my favorite photos, kind of says it all. I've got my tea and rum, fire's made, sun's going down, just had a nice walleye dinner, had a great day. There are a few climbing spots in and nearby Wabakimi for the people that have the skills. This is Spaghetti Island on Smooth Rock Lake. And this picture was taken in the mid-70s, but we still camp there in good weather, and on a cold, rainy day, it's a little exposed, but on a beautiful sunny day, what a campsite. The falls in Wabakimi, there are probably 8, 10, 12 falls in the park, and 4 of the big ones are on the Kapka River, the Four Sisters, and there are portages around them, of course. Sometimes those who brave up to Wabakimi in late September get this little surprise on their birch leaves, a little bit of frost and snow. You might, the third week in May, you might get a little snowfall, surprise snowfall, and then end of September, winter can sometimes come a little early there as well. Northern Lights is a spectacular thing to see. The chances are good to see it. There are no filters in this photo. Once again, this is forest fires upwind, and the light being diffused by the forest fire particles in the air. Once again, late September, you might see a little of this white stuff. Freezes up about mid-October, used to be mid-October, now it's more like early November with global climate change, which is definitely really happening, in case you're still debating that. And it is a threat to all of our ecosystems, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Wabakimi. Our final picture is on the Lookout River at one of my favorite little campsites called Walleye Kitchen. So I'm seated on a rock with a fire, and you cast and you catch a walleye. You don't have to get up. You fillet your walleye and you throw it in the frying pan. You put the guts into the river for the minnows to eat, and you can do it all 3 feet from the waterfall and the pool below it. Walleye Kitchen, well named. Thanks for joining us for this little slideshow on Wabakimi. And once again, if you're watching this live streamed right now, you can probably ask me some questions. And if not, if you're watching it on YouTube or some other way, then just send me an email, bruce@wabakimi.com. BRUCE@WABAKIMI.com. Thanks for joining us. Hope to help you share Wabakimi sometime soon. Give us a shout. Bye-bye. Hi, I'm still Bruce Hyer. Thanks for watching that nice slideshow. Pretty pictures, eh? Beautiful place. I'm pretty biased, but Wabakimi is the best. It's bigger, wilder, a little trickier to access, but a wonderful place to go for a paddling holiday or a fly-in fishing outpost. Once again, we have a wonderful map, the Wabakimi Park planning map. It's not very expensive. We pop it in the mail to you no matter where you are. Then you can call me and we can have a chat about possible routes that'll match your budget and match your needs. And thanks so much for joining us today with this slideshow. I'm Bruce Hyer, Mr. Wabakimi. Have a great day.